In rotation. Thank you, Madam Bateman. In rotation now, over to Mr. Allen.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to our guests for being here. Mr. Khan, you were taking us down a road about how one looks at, in respect to Mr. Aspin's question about, why did we look at U.S. numbers and why did we look at Canadian numbers? Walk us down that path a bit more in not absolute detail because time is limited, obviously, but give us a sort of a decent overview as to how that actually unfolds and why that's really important and why we end up almost basically at the same stop at the end of the day.
Sir, there are the program has had, well-publicized cost overruns and delays associated with these. But one of the advantages, I think one of the points Mr. Page had made earlier was that we actually now have some useful reference points, and we've recommended that parliamentarians at least consider that both figures coming out of the Selected Acquisition Report plus reports coming out of the U.S. Government Accountability Office begin to actually start to illuminate the subject in terms of providing estimates on both acquisition costs and ONS, long-term sustainment, in effect, life cycle costs. So part of the issue here is that there are now good reference points. A year ago when we did our report, there was not an independent estimate that you could pull out for the F-35A nor for sustainment, of which operating support is the largest component. A year later now, we're seeing in the Selected Acquisition Report and through the U.S. Department of Defense CAPE, you're seeing these numbers and you're seeing average procurement unit cost numbers that are actually also important because this is the basis of budgeting in the United States and appropriations, not recurring flyaway. So you'll see in the Selected Acquisition Report that the same figures used here will go then as part of the Defense Department submission for the budget process.
So from your experience, the costing of, since we buy this plane if we buy it, from the U.S. government, not actually from Lockheed Martin, because that's the way eventually if we decide to buy this plane. So we get the same price that they get for that particular model, according to the MOU. Is it safe to assume that the cost to operate here would be, plus or minus, say, 5% of what the costs are to operate in the U.S.?
I mean, sir, that at this point for us, that would be speculative. I think what we can refer you to is the fact that they've now put an estimate of the cost difference, their belief in the cost difference, using parametric models to look at the ONS cost per flying hour for the F-35. And you'll see on page 84, they actually give you the flying hours for the 35A versus the other variants. So you can actually, we provided a kind of an illustrative calculation of that. But you can now start to see those indications. So to your first question, it is useful now to start to use these reference points to look at what's reasonable. And I think the same point about parametric modeling, the use of this, what's reasonable. And if points start to converge, then at least from a parliamentary point of view, there's a richer planning environment and you can have a little more confidence going forward. We caution that they're all estimates at this point. But to your first question, it becomes interesting when they start to converge. And that's why we think the latest report published just 5 weeks ago from the U.S. Department of Defense is very, very handy in that regard.
Sir, if I just may add very quickly that, just to put in a plug for Department of Defense officials, that when the numbers that they presented to Cabinet, I think on a full life cycle basis, looking at operation support, we would say we're quite close to what was provided very recently by the Selected Acquisition Report, which I think gives the budget officer certainly a lot of comfort.
So, I don't disagree, by the way, that $25.1 billion reported to Cabinet is a reasonable, to use your term, Mr. Khan, what a reasonable person doing this would probably come up with. Unfortunately, that's not the number they told the Canadian public. They said it was less than $15 billion. So the reality is, albeit we can give them credit for telling Cabinet, we can't give them credit for not telling us and the general public that it was $10 billion less is what they communicated. So they didn't really give us what information they knew. They gave us other information. So, Mr. Khan, and to you, Mr. Page, I recognize you've done this as a career, I would assume, as a cost analyst. In your experience, have you seen these programs ever go down in price?
No, actually, sir, and again, that's one of the reasons why when we looked at different models, we looked at the experience of the F-35, when we took on this project, that we thought a cost estimating relationship kind of project that picks up these escalating costs. And there's a chart that we have, I'm just going to flag it, I know you can't see it, but it's in our report that looks at 30 or 40 years worth of history, and you could see, like when you look at the cost of this type of technology, these sorts of systems on like a per kilogram basis, it's been growing exponentially, certainly 3.5%, and then, or actually in the 4% range when you add in the weight itself. So, the costs have been going up.
Sorry, time has expired, Mr. Allen.